Welcome to the Voices of Manufacturing with your hosts, Brian Salee and Michael Mullenberg, where business leaders across the industry share their unique challenges and insights.
It's almost like magic because it takes the learning process sometimes from weeks down to days, sometimes hours.
We want to help people within manufacturing and make them excited to come to work every day and go home safe to their family.
When you bring people in, they're anything but a machine. They're partners that can help you build your business, that can be your success if you treat them right.
And then you start having employees saying, when are you doing my machine? When are you going to come over here to my department? And now you get this buy-in.
This podcast is brought to you by Dazuki, the premier frontline digital transformation solution that allows manufacturers to standardize operations.
Hey, Michael, I heard you've been busy this summer. You've had quite a few new clients you've been working with.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement in manufacturing. It's volumes are going up, companies are growing. They're trying to maintain, a balance between cost control and growth. And it's an exciting time for manufacturing here in the US.
Yeah, it really is. I've been seeing a lot of data on reshoring and continue to see, signs that manufacturing's grown in the US. I know we were talking recently, and one of the things you mentioned to me that really kind of piqued my interest was you've been seeing a lot of manufacturers that are interested in implementing 5S. It sounds like a lot of them have tried to implement in the past, kind of got away from it, and now they're looking to reestablish 5S as a key tool in their lean toolbox.
A lot of companies are bringing up that topic. It starts a conversation of maybe relaunching and shoring up their lean efforts. And then what I'm noticing, I'm digging a little deeper, and it's like, well, why that tool? Why now? And I'm seeing this trend. It's a bit of a pandemic recovery. Volumes were maybe down. People were not coming to work. They were shorthanded. Now they're back in a growth mode, so they're too busy catching up on orders. And I'm not saying growth isn't a bad thing, but they're so busy making the product and getting stuff out the door, they've kind of let some of their lean systems, and in particular 5S and visual control, slide a little bit. And on top of that, these companies that are growing, they're bringing in a lot of new people, and they don't know what it was like, back in the old days when 5S was sort of part of the culture. So I'm seeing all those things are kind of working together to create this gap, and they're starting to realize it and say, hey, let's start over. Let's go back to the basics. Do some training, do some assessments, and just get this started again. So it's lots of great opportunities for improvement, as always.
With these companies, I'm really curious because, lean is this great methodology, right? It's, fundamental for a lot of manufacturers. They couldn't imagine operating without lean tools in place and really practicing lean methodology. Are you seeing companies though that are, practicing or implementing 5S, and maybe they aren't implementing a lean methodology to go with it? This is just one tool that they picked out of the lean toolbox and decided they wanted to use.
Yeah, well, that was definitely a trend, 20 years ago when the consultant wave kind of came through, and they would start you out with a 5S exercise and training, and then you'd gradually learn the rest of the toolkit. And unfortunately, a lot of those were failed attempts. They would shine things up. It became a housekeeping effort, and they never really got much beyond that. Today, I see some of the same thing. It's a way of reinitiating their lean efforts. Hopefully, we don't make the same mistake we made in the past. It's not a bad place to start. You can see visible results. You can impact productivity, quality, and especially safety in the short term. So I'm not saying it's a bad place to start, but you got to go beyond that. And there's a lot more to it to become, truly lean and really, embrace this concept of enterprise excellence.
Yeah, I keep going back to our last episode, and we talked a lot about this, especially around this idea. You've got to have management buy in. There's got to be a vision. Especially if you're implementing lean, that you're, not pushing down, but you're sharing with your frontline operators that gives them some purpose, a reason for why they're doing these things.
Let's say, yeah, it's back to the Simon Sinek book. It starts with why. The leader's job is to communicate the why behind lean, behind 5S, behind, the visual factory. And the better they are at communicating that and kind of leading by example, even the more sustainable these efforts are. And frankly, leadership and people on the front line, we lose the handle on this. There's just this manufacturing entropy, I like to call it. It
Yes.
doesn't just stay put. Things change.
Well, let's move forward then. I know a lot of folks are familiar with 5S. It's a really common lean tool. Uh, you want to give us just kind of a quick rundown, what is 5S just for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with it?
Yeah, simply it's a method or a practice of workplace organization. I always like to tell people that it's a proven methodology. It works. You don't have to argue whether it works or doesn't work or it might work. It does work to some level, no matter how much effort you put behind it. And I'm not going to give you the Japanese S words for the five S's, but I'll give you the English version. And it starts with sort. I think in Japanese it translates as more as like sifting, like sorting and sifting through the stuff that's in your area. Usually it's followed by set in order, putting things in a specific order, place. Everything has a place. Shining, which includes repair, restoration, bringing things back to kind of a new condition, as well as just general cleaning, painting, and then getting rid of the dirt and the grime. Next is standardize. What is the standard for 5S and for these other elements? And then the last S, which isn't really talked about in some cultures, but it's I think it's pretty important, is the sustain aspect. How do you sustain the system through management involvement, accountability, audits, and such. The way I usually deploy it is I move the shine to second. So I sort and then I shine, then I set an order, then standardize, sustain. And I think when you're deploying this with teams, you don't want to put equipment back in place that's not working properly or is damaged or needs to be shined. So before you set it in order, we want to shine and restore back to new, and then put it back in place in a particular order and work through the rest of the process. And so I think that's just a little trick that I've come across. It People also get pretty excited about the shining, the cleaning, the retooling, changing the oil, making sure that everything is functioning properly. Even when you think about like a chef in a kitchen, I mean, sharpening the knife at the end of the shift before they go home is a real common practice. So there's a daily shine activity that's part of their everyday work. So it's good to use that as an example as you're teaching this and trying to deploy it.
And if we go back, I'm just thinking, for an organization, a lot of folks will bring in a lean consultant to help them, implement 5S, or they have somebody on staff that they've hired that, has a lean background. Where do you typically see companies starting with their implementation of 5S? Are there particular areas? I know manufacturing's there's a broad spectrum of things that companies are making, but ideally, where do you start when you're implementing 5S? Is it at the workstation, the individual workstation? Is it a more broad area like, shipping and receiving? Like what's kind of the standard you've seen there?
Yeah, well, as you alluded to, it's easy to see 5S in disarray in a manufacturing environment. It's so visual. If it's organized, if it's messy, if it's dirty. It's very easy to spot. So most people start in manufacturing and they might pick a work cell and they may get it up to top condition and use that as a model for the rest of the area. But then very quickly it moves into the office, into the warehouse, into the quality lab, engineering. I mean, you can 5S your workspace on your laptop. I was going to ask you how organized is your laptop, your file structure, how quickly can you retrieve information? I mean, that's digital, personal computer 5S.
So it sounds like what you're saying is start it closest to where the main work is happening, that individual work cell station, whatever you want to call it, and then work your way out from there. Um,
Definitely prove the concept in an actual workspace, a manufacturing environment. By the way, often it's triggered by a safety incident or a near miss. And then it's like, well, we better go review our 5S and our visual controls, which I usually put together, by the way. 5S and visual controls go hand in hand. I don't really separate them. You can't have really one without the other. And whatever it takes to get you started. If it's a near miss or an audit, or you've got a customer coming to visit, I don't really care what the motivation is. Just get it done. Move forward.
I was going to say for a lot of manufacturers that are suppliers to other manufacturers, one of the key motivators I've seen is we want our factory to look really good. So when our customers come in or our prospects come in, we can show off how clean the factory is, how organized it is. And nothing can influence your perception of quality more than seeing a clean factory
Yeah.
or a dirty
Well,
one.
back in the '80s, we used to joke, we if we could smell paint, that we knew the executives were coming for a visit. And so that was only one of the S's, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
it predated this methodology. Was, hey, get things in looking nice. Bad markings on the floors and paint chipping doesn't look like your factory's in good shape.
Well, we've kind of touched on, you went through what is 5S. We talked about each of those elements here. And I think we'll go into more detail in a minute, but I'm curious if we talked a little bit about this just now as well. Like, what are the benefits of 5S? And I'm mostly interested in understanding the benefits from the individual employee, because that's often where lean falls apart is you don't engage the employees. They see no reason to do the things you're asking them to do because there's no benefit to them. How have you seen companies get their operators, their frontline employees on board with 5S, and what are the
Yeah.
benefits for them?
Yeah. Well, and I love that focus on what's in it for me, what's in it for the front line. And there are many things. It's hard to capture them all, actually. There's so many, side benefits, hidden benefits. But really, it starts with reduced waste. It's mostly around motion, wasted time looking for supplies, walking across the room to grab a tool that you may be using very frequently. It ties into making less mistakes. So your quality goes up. You're not doing as much rework. I mentioned safety. Sometimes I'll really look at the safety aspect. In a chemical factory, I'll look at spills and drips and chemical debris and accumulation and saying, look, we don't really want to work in that kind of environment. It's just not safe. And then I kind of wrap up all those benefits with saying it also sets the tone for standard work. If you're not maintaining standards around the workplace organization, where the tools are, where the materials are, what is the ideal state for your work cell, how are you going to follow an operating standard or a standard for creating a job or a particular part for a customer? And so I think that's why a lot of the consultants start with 5S as kind of a way of testing the standard work system. Let's do that first, and then let's move and do standard work across the board. Something I'm noticing lately, there's a joke about, every factory's got a guy that reminds you of Pigpen from the Peanuts cartoon. And, they like it dirty. They like it messy. It makes them comfortable. And yet the majority of people really like a cleaner, more organized workspace. And so I think for most of them, it improves the more employee morale, might improve your retention. It builds a little bit of pride in the workplace. And then when you have that customer come in or that executive come in, they can really show off their area and say, like, we really know what we're doing. We're very organized. It's a precision, clean, safe, effective manufacturing environment.
I keep going back to the situations I've been in a factory and a tool is missing and somebody's looking for it. And you hate to be that employee that's sitting there running around trying to find this tool that you need to do your job. And that's where 5S is just such a great tool for preventing those type of wasted movement, waste of time situations. But you mentioned something here, standardization, right? We talk about this all the time. We believe standards are, how do you operate without standards? I know we're big believers in it. It's really important with 5S too. You mind kind of explaining, the role that, standardization plays in 5S? And my question too for you is, why is it important? And also, where does it fit in as you implement 5S? Do you develop standards at the beginning, or is that something you develop over time as you get, a better understanding of how you want to practice 5S?
Well, as I mentioned, it all ties back to standard work. It's the first test case for do you have standards or not? I ask a lot of the companies I interact with, what is the standard? Do we have a standard? And usually the answer is no, or it's in a book somewhere, or we used to, green means pedestrian aisle. Everybody knows that. So we don't write that down. And, I get a lot of runaround. Um, And it's kind of interesting to see how little standardization and documentation there is around, all of the elements of 5S and the visual controls. So I like to start there. I mean, I think that's a mistake we made in the past is we rushed to the tool and we didn't look at creating a standard or an expectation. And I'll mention just an example about visual controls, even a guide to what do different colors mean in a factory and the signage and the labeling. That's part of the 5S system. It's also part of the visual control system. So let's share with a new employee, an existing employee, what these mean in our work environment. I was in one factory where half the factory, the pedestrian aisles were green and the other half were yellow. And you crossed through a threshold and you had to know the difference between the two factories. A little confusing for a visitor. So yeah, you want to establish that standard up front, make it self-improving as you do projects, as you learn. You can improve the standard, you can update the standard. And I think that's so important to create a visual standard for your visual system.
I go back to, we did an episode with Mark Preston a while back on the rattlesnake hunt, which was just an awesome tool and ties into 5S. And, he mentioned, and this goes back to standards, getting standards in place. Well, what are the non-negotiables? Like these things are just,
Yes.
they have to be this way. Things can't exist in this way. Is that part of developing the standards is here's what good looks like. Here's what bad looks like. That's
Yeah.
the first thing you do with operators, essentially.
Well, absolutely. And with a work cell or work area that doesn't change much, very easy to establish the non-negotiables and what it should look like. Where you've got modular manufacturing, you've got carts, you've got equipment being reorganized. I just talked to somebody this morning that's doing that. And it's a little bit harder to set a single standard, but you can have general standards about, put things away when you're done, or this, we reset at the end of a batch or at the end of a shift. Yeah, some things maybe people could do it a little bit their own way, but there are some non-negotiables, especially when it comes to safety and quality and really all that motion waste we talked about. The other question that comes up a lot lately that I ask, if they don't have a standard, they get kind of squeamish. Well, we don't really talk about that. I said, well, if you don't have a standard, then when do you talk about 5S? And when do you talk about visual controls?
Yeah.
And I also get blank stares like, well, we don't. And so, well, look at your workplace. It's obvious you don't have a standard and it's obvious you don't talk about it. And so now here we are, we're going to talk about it. We're going to establish a standard. And in the future, you're going to have to talk about it periodically. So this ties into our previous episode where you and I talked about daily management. Daily management tier meetings, we love to talk about productivity and quality and inventory and, all these things, but why not talk about our 5S and visual control standards and our status? Can you already have that meeting every day with your crew? But I don't know why we don't talk about it. So that I always encourage people to add that to the agenda of a tier meeting, maybe daily, every other day, weekly at least, and say, how are we doing? Do things look good? Bring out that visual standard you mentioned. And I know you can even capture photos now of current state and do like a checklist. Go through and maybe somebody has to bring a visual example of what they saw to review at the tier meeting. And let's take a look at the pictures and in a huddle and look at how we're doing. Very
Yeah.
easily enabled with the digital technology and mobile devices.
Yeah, I like where we're headed here. So we've got non-negotiables. What does good look like? That's our first kind of set of standards. Second set of standards is how often are we and when are we going to talk about
Mhm.
5S and actually review how well we're doing or not how well we're doing. So there's a frequency to these reviews. At Dazuki, we saw this with a lot of our early customers wanted to do 5S audits. So they would
Mhm.
create essentially audit forms. They would do 5S checklists for the operator. So at the end of the day, they can go through and they can do their checklist. And so they start the next shift and everything is where it's supposed to be for that second shift operator, third shift operator. What are some additional standards that you want to get into place beyond non-negotiables, kind of the frequency of review? What other things have you seen from your clients?
Yeah. Well, actually, before I move on, I was going to mention something. You just triggered a thought there is if you have that digital checklist and the system established, just having that tool in place and that standard in place also allows you to assign roles and expectations. So if you don't have a standard, you don't have a checklist, it's hard to set an expectation. So those tools really enable you to assign and hold people accountable and get that feedback. So it really it completes the circle of improvement then. And so really makes it much easier than the old days of the paper checklists and the well, I saw this mess and I said, well, no, it doesn't look like that when I looked at it, but I was there an hour later. And so you start debating about what is the standard and what is the current state. Well, now it can be all digital and you can assign responsibility and away you go. Well, back to other standards that support this system. I mean, standards for visual controls. I mentioned the colors, the signage, where we put in and-on systems and alert systems, where we have hard stops, gates, and warning signals to keep us safe in our environment. But there's a whole bunch of other ones. Like here's an example. I'm working with a company and they get ready to do 5S and they want to do the first S and they want to sort and sift through everything in the area and they end up with these big piles of stuff. And clearly it doesn't belong in the area. It's obsolete. They want to get rid of it. And so I said, well, where's the standard for disposing of solid waste or metal cabinets or raw materials that are expired? And I get this blank stare. Well, somebody else handles that. We don't know what the standard is for disposing of the junk. I'm sure they have it somewhere, but it wasn't readily accessible. It wasn't available to the people that were doing the 5S. How to order supplies. We say, oh, we should really, put some labels on this or put some striping down or, some visual indicator. So how do we order a roll of yellow tape? And the guy running the project goes, I don't know. I'm not in purchasing. I've never ordered yellow tape before. So there's all kinds of support standards that you kind of need in place to make sure the team can get the work done.
So this is almost like, if we're following this, what are the different types of standards, right? Non-negotiables. Now we're talking about roles and responsibilities as well, which that seems like probably a missing piece for a lot of companies that are trying to sustain 5S is who's ultimately holding people accountable to making sure that their workplace is clean. Who's reviewing if you are doing those checklists, who's reviewing the checklist or who's doing the audits. Is that pretty common then I guess probably not pretty common, but, setting up roles and responsibilities. How have you seen companies go about that? I
Yeah.
imagine there's not a lot of people raising their hand to be,
No,
to take on that additional work.
no, they are not. No, again, if you establish a standard and it's built from the team within, the responsibility is of the team that owns the workspace. And really the responsibility of the leadership is to audit, to coach to the standard, ask what help do you need if things are failing repeatedly. Maybe the standard's not effective. Maybe we've got an external influence, some stuff happening. And so it really enables the whole team to not only do things well, but keep them in good shape and maintain them and improve them. And the responsibility for the area is the owner of the area. They're responsible for the audits and the improvement system might be the next layer of management all the way up the chain. And then you've got visible evidence that you're following a standard, you're improving the standard. And when you deviate, people look around and say, "Wait, something doesn't feel right in the area." They're immediately alerted to a non-normal condition.
What I'm hearing from you, as I'm kind of understanding this a little bit more is leadership is really plays a key role in this because ultimately they're the ones saying, hey, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for this, and holding those people accountable. It's at least 3 layers there of
Yeah.
different roles and responsibilities that really need to be set, laid out clearly.
And it's not fun. Honestly, initially to go in and audit an area and say, "Hey, we're not up to standard. Things don't look great. Let's reset. I'll be back tomorrow to check on you." And you kind of have to be the bad parent, kind of nagging them a little bit initially. And for my own life, I had this with my son when he was taking piano lessons. His instructor wanted him to practice 20 minutes a day, and I had to sign the sheet. And as an auditor, I needed to make sure that he was doing his homework and his practice. So I told him I'm not going to sign the sheet until I hear the music. And, oh, you're a bad dad. You're so mean. I just sign the form. I practice. Don't you trust me? And I said, no, I don't trust you. But after a couple years of that, I mean, years, literally, my son says to me, hey, dad, come here. I want to play something for you on the piano. I want to show you what I've accomplished. And so now I'm a coach. I'm not an auditor anymore. I'm listening. I'm saying, what are some potential problems you might be having? But I don't have to command, I need to see the work getting done. So it becomes a much more collaborative environment. I like to use the phrase when I'm out on the shop floor, hey, things don't look like they're up to standard. What help do you need? Let's get this taken care of. I'm not going to punish you. I want to get the help. Now, I may not be the help you need, but I'm gonna secure the help, and I'm gonna reach out to the resources that we think we need to get it reset back to the condition. And maybe we had a spill, maybe we had a rush order, maybe we got some bad raw materials, maybe we had a new employee that didn't know the standard. There's probably a lot of reasons for why things got, kind of messed up. Let's get it back. Let's get it back quickly.
And Michael, I want to, as we're going to wrap up here, one thing that I always think about with manufacturing, there's always the target. You're always trying to hit that production target. And things like this, a great tool like 5S, it's easy to let it fall by the wayside. How do companies sustain this? Like, obviously that's the last S in this. Like, what do you think is the big, maybe there's not one thing, but if there was, one thing that companies should focus on for sustaining, what is that?
Well, yeah, there's the multi-factor, but there's one that really stands out to me. And we often don't make time to do the work, right? So we don't make time to execute or reset the system or even make improvements to the system. When we get busy, we focus on production and not on maintaining the workspace. Now that's okay as long as you've got a rhythm of, end of the week we do a reset, or end of the shift. Things get messy. If you're not making a mess, you're not making product. I don't want to say you just spend your whole day cleaning and not making product, but I think we do have to set aside a bit of time, a rhythm, and call time out if we need a reset when things get a little bit out of hand. And I'm seeing that again with companies that after several years of, pandemic operations and now growth, they're pushing the reset button saying, okay, let's go after it. And I applaud that they're investing in some training, some materials, to get us back to that ideal 5S state. And then again, they've got to build time into the maintaining it as well. That includes audit time, doing time, improving time.
What you're making me realize here is if you just try to implement a tool like this without really buying into the lean methodology, you're going to fail, right? Because one of the biggest things of lean, right? We're going to pull the cord. We're going to stop the line to fix the issue that's popping up, which is just the complete opposite for a lot of manufacturers that aren't practicing lean, right? It's really hard to stop the line and address the issue. And that's what you're basically saying is we got to make time. We got to stop production so we could focus on these things, because ultimately it's going to allow us to do our best work.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of hidden benefits there as we talked about. And it ends up being in ideal situations. And I've seen companies doing this really well over time. It really gets under their skin. It's part of their culture. They're proud of their workplace. They're proud of their work environment. They don't want unsafe or bad quality situations arising. And back to my comment about employee ownership, employee morale. Most people love working in a safe, clean, well organized environment, and so that should always be kind of that underlying goal.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Michael, this was a great overview on 5S. I know there's a lot more, especially folks who have been practicing lean for a long time could chime in here, but this is a great overview and good discussion, especially around standardization and how it could be applied to 5S.
Yeah, well, and stay tuned. Maybe we can do a follow-up episode and talk about how these companies that are relaunching, how they're succeeding. I'm sure we're gonna come across some more tips and tricks, and especially on that standardization. What does the standard look like, and when do you talk about it? And some real life examples of people that are doing it well. So I think we can revisit this topic down the road too.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, we've got a couple other episodes that go well, I'd say are companions to this episode. Michael and I did an episode on daily management, as well as we had Mark Preston on, and Mark has got a lot of experience with lean. And he did an episode with us on his rattlesnake hunt concept, which is really a tool that's part of 5S. So those are great companion episodes to listen to with this as well.
Yeah, very good.
All right. Well, thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Voices of Manufacturing podcast with Brian Salee and Michael Mullenberg. This show is brought to you by Dazuki, the premier digital transformation solution that allows manufacturers to standardize operations. Our website, where you can listen to our episodes and find tons of helpful resources, is dazuki.com. Sign up for our monthly newsletter so you'll be the first to know about new episodes. That's dazuki.com, and join us in creating the front line of the future.